It was a secret. It was a secret I kept.
Your partners are not welcome in our house. That will never happen.
I was 14, and that's when I had my first affair.
She called me up and said, I pray every night that my child doesn't turn out like you.
They sent people to Leavenworth for being gay.
My biggest fear was that the people that I loved would not love me anymore.
Thinking about being with another girl was absolutely forbidden.
Well, my drag persona is named Cypress Star.
Knew that I liked girls and boys.
My mother had been calling me all sorts of names behind my back. Faggot, he's queer.
We are who we are, and that's that.
I think I sort of knew it from a very, very early age, but I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know anything about what gay meant. I just knew that I was different. I really was attracted to women. I couldn't put a sexual attraction to it. I just enjoyed being with women more than I did with men. About the age of 18 or 19, I really did know that I was most likely a homosexual, which is what people would say back then, and I didn't particularly like being a homosexual because at that time it was considered an aberration, it was considered a crime if you were caught being a homosexual. It was very, very frightening, extremely frightening.
I think coming out was a journey for me. I knew growing up that I was somehow different, and growing up in the Irish Catholic neighborhood that I grew up, there were two choices in life. One was to be married and the other was to be a nun. I chose the nun. And so I did enter the convent after high school, and in fact while I was in the convent I had been accused of being a lesbian, and I did not at all identify myself that way. So after 5 years, I did leave the convent, and I tried so hard to find a man to date that I would be interested in. And I did find one, but I wasn't very interested, and I soon realized I was more consumed by spending time with my women friends than I was with this male. So I let that go and moved on, and I found the first love of my life. And truly the first love, because I didn't date in high school, I had never kissed anyone, and this became my everything person. It was a woman, and I had to recognize in myself at age 26, what is this? So I decided that it was only important in life that you love someone, and what that someone was really didn't matter.
Well, I was born in 1939, the war period, and I consider myself even older because I was adopted by grandparents who were born in the 1890s. But I also grew up with adopted parents who were very liberal, and they couldn't decide which church to go to, so they simply didn't go to church. I did because it's a small community, and I played the piano in a small rural Presbyterian church. I knew I was gay long before it was sexual. I think with most men it's the reverse. They have lots of sex and then they discover they actually have a label for it. I just maybe didn't develop that way. And there wasn't much opportunity. We were rural, basically in a rural area, so there just weren't that many people. Now in the church, I was always falling in love with the new minister. I kind of knew what it meant, but I mean, obviously I was not going to act on it, and he was not going to act on it either.
We're both writers, and we met at a writing workshop out in Colorado, and I was married, and I'd twice been married to men. She's twice been married to men. It was just one of those moments where you're going, holy shit. I got divorced. I moved to Colorado. I spent a year just kind of going, what is this? Not this, but what is this? And ended up moving to Brooklyn, New York to
Which
be
is
with
where
Michelle.
I'm from. I've lived in Brooklyn all my life before living here. I remember feeling feelings for girls when I was younger, and knowing that was completely something I had to hide. I grew up in a Catholic school environment, and although the girls went to, they spent a lot of time together, thinking about being with another girl was absolutely forbidden.
I kept my feelings very secret for a long time when I was young. I would not admit it sometimes to myself. My mother was extremely religious, and so I realized that these feelings that I had were not what other people had, or there was something about it that told me I shouldn't think this way, feel this way, and so I kept it very much a secret.
As far as coming out, for me, it was more about deciding whether or not to be honest. I think my biggest fear was that the people that I loved would not love me anymore. I was actually outed to my mother by my boyfriend at the time's jealous ex-lover. It was really devastating to me that my mother was like suddenly very cool, and she just did not really know what to do with that information, and it was harmful to our relationship for a couple of years. But thank goodness she decided that she loved me, and that, it really didn't matter.
I never had a problem coming out. Of course, I was in my 30s, but I didn't have a problem with other people's various identities, and I didn't have a problem when I myself came out. I think it's because my parents raised us to accept people for what they are, and learn who they are and work with that instead of whatever somebody's identity might be. Prejudice in our house didn't exist, which was a nice way to grow up.
I grew up in the South and went to church pretty much all my life. And at a young age, I remember being attracted to some of the prettier women at church and the singers, and feeling a connection. Didn't really understand some of that. You're told all your life you're going to hell if you do this and if you're this way. And I was really torn. I struggled with it for many years.
I was 14, and that's when I had my first affair with a girl. I played a lot of sports, and I was also in the band. And we did a lot of traveling with the band and also with sports. And my first affair was with a girl in the band. And it was remarkable at the time, and of course I had no idea. But I later then found out that there were a lot of people just like me.
I always knew that I liked women from a very young age, and I thought I just kind of had a hero admiration thing for them. But as I got into my teenage years, I realized that there was a sexual aspect to it. I realized it, but I didn't want to act on it, and I didn't want that to be a part of my life. A lot of it was just being a teenager in a small community, in a small school, and wanting to fit in. And just knowing that that wasn't an accepted thing, and feeling like I was the only one.
I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and my brother and I both got G.I. Joes. My brother took his G.I. Joe, and he went off in the woods to kill communists. And I took my G.I. Joe, and we went around behind the house, and we took our clothes off and lay on the beach together. And my dad came around the corner, and I had my G.I. Joe laying there with his clothes off, and he looked at me, and he had this really strange look on his face of disappointment. And I didn't know what I'd done wrong, but I knew I'd done something wrong. And then when I was like 13 or 14 years old, we got a Time magazine, and it had an article on Rudolf Nureyev, the ballet dancer. And I saw this picture of this man, and I thought, oh, that's what's different about me. And I knew then, this was small town South Carolina, I needed to keep that to myself. So it was a secret. It was a secret I kept until I was 17 years old.
When I started junior high school, I started playing volleyball and basketball. And I had a friend that I met that played at another school, and one day we were playing basketball and we were talking, and she goes, by the way, I'm gay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I was like, oh, I can't be your friend. I can't be your friend because of my, childhood experience with the church, and it was wrong, and it was just unacceptable. And then the next day I said, you know what, I love you and you're my friend, and I think I'm a lot like you. And that right there was, I felt like some intervention to say, hey, it's okay and you're not by yourself. And I had several friends in middle school that we kind of all came out together, I guess.
There was an incident where someone in the college, in the university, was expelled. She was caught in some homosexual act somewhere. And I found myself going to the stacks in the library to read all about it. Found out that it was considered a disease. And then plus you look around in society, people were in prison for being a homosexual. I literally just decided that I probably was going to go my entire life being a single female, that I would be an independent woman and go out and see the world. And then in my 39th year of age, a woman walked into my life, and I knew that I was not going to let this opportunity pass me by. And I went into psychotherapy, and my psychotherapist said, I'm so glad that you have finally found out you're a sexual being.
When I first realized in Pittsburgh that I was having a gay relationship, I called my best friend from the convent, and we're still friends to this day, and she was very accepting. But a few years later, when she was pregnant with her first child, she called me up and said, I pray every night that my child doesn't turn out like you. I just retorted right back, and I'll pray every night she does. Yeah, so it was just a world where you were just so confined.
I went into nursing at the age of 20. When I was 23 years old, worked as a operating room nurse for a couple of years, and then joined the Air Force. I really liked the military and actually wanted to make that my career. If I had come out, I would have been stripped of my rank and I would have been put in prison. They sent people to Leavenworth for being gay. I realized that if I was going to be who I was, I would not be in the service, so I got out.
My mother probably always knew, because I'll never forget one time when she said to me, Dawn, I never want you to get married, because if you did, you would divorce him. And I said, you're right. And we just agreed, and that was it. And she always was very supportive of all my friends that I brought home, all through college and after college, when I went away and would come back, she always was very supportive.
I actually met my partner online. We met. He was in Fort Lauderdale, and I was in Greensboro, and we met online, and we ended up meeting up in real life, and we were together for almost 18 years. And the reception that I got was really fantastic, because his family welcomed me with open arms, my family welcomed him with open arms, and it was just never any question. It was really fantastic.
My son is gay too, so he is, very understanding about everything. I came out first. He was 7 years old when I came out, and it was funny because I remember I would go on dates, and for a while, I got serious, and I was seeing this woman. I had joint custody with my husband. If he was staying with me and the woman was over, I always made sure that if it was a situation where she had spent the night or whatever, in the morning I would be in the living room. And my 7 or 8 year old son at one point came to me at that time, and I hadn't come out to him, and he's like, Mom, why are you sleeping out here when your girlfriend is in the bedroom? So, I mean, he was clear on it, very early on, and he was always seemed to be kind of proud of it. I mean, he would tell his friends about it, he'd tell his daycare teachers about it. But I was really surprised when he came out in his early 20s, and he didn't come out until his dad died. And he said, I would never have done it while he was still alive, because I don't think he would have accepted that.
When I realized that I was gay, I didn't even know that word, but I remember hearing about Anita Bryant. She had this initiative to ban gay people from teaching in the schools, and it passed. And it was a big news story back in the 70s. I remember thinking, oh, Florida, that's where they keep us. And that's the first time I knew that there were people other than me. The advent of HIV/AIDS, at least in the gay male community, it will always be the event that defines the generation that I come from. And it wasn't just that we individually were dying, it's that the community was threatened. And it could have shattered into thousands of pieces and gone underground. Thankfully, what did happen, some very brave men and women stood up and said, "Fight AIDS, fight back."
I think surviving through the epidemic has fundamentally changed the way that the older generation looks at the world. And that's something that my generation didn't experience. And, from hearing from my older friends, there are a lot of things going on today that are kind of steering us down that same path that led to the outbreak to begin with. The older generation has the hindsight and, I guess, at the same time, foresight to know this is coming, and they're talking and they're trying to get these points out there, but I think that most of my generation is too dumb to listen. It was actually significantly easier to come out to my family than it was to my friends, which surprised me because you always hear these horror stories about family rejection. Thankfully, I never experienced any of that. Actually, when I came out, it was kind of like Thanksgiving dinner. "Hi everybody, I'm gay. Yeah, we know, pass the salt," type ordeal. And then my grandma proceeded to tell me a story of how she knew I was gay when I was 5, to which I asked why she didn't tell me.
I feel like it was really natural to me. Like, I always sort of knew that I liked, girls and boys, and it just, until I found the term for it, that's when I kind of was like, okay, I know that I'm bisexual. So I feel like I came about my sexuality more in 4th grade when I was 9. I came out to one of my best friends at the time, one of my only friends at the time. She wanted to tell her best friend, and her best friend ended up asking me if she could tell other people, and they kind of took it okay, so I felt like it would be okay to tell more people, and it ended up going around the entire school. And I was in elementary school, and there was a middle school connected by annex, and the middle schoolers knew. It was just, people would tell me that their parents had group dinner discussions about it, and it was just, it didn't make me feel very nice. Like, it just wasn't a very good experience, and I kind of got ostracized.
I always knew something was a little bit different about me, or I guess I didn't discover that I was a little bit more queer than most until I was about 16. Sort of like a huge revelation. Coming from a black community and a black household, there wasn't a resource out of where I was that guided me to where I needed to be. So it's kind of I figured it out on my own, which was kind of cool, I didn't tell 4 out of 5 of my siblings. One of my siblings at the time, the sister older than me, was actually in the military dating another female. So everybody thought I was just copycatting. But she kind of took me under her wing and I guess asked for advice and be present in that moment. At the time, my mother and I had a very close relationship. Coming out at the time, I felt like I was kind of letting her down just because I was the baby, I was the one that she doted on, I was the one that she paid more attention to. I didn't want to upset her for any reason. At the time, I had sort of gotten into activism in a way, the whole gay, that's okay kind of thing. And my parents had seen me on TV. Well, my mother pulls me aside one day and she says, "Oh, your stepdad feels some kind of way about this because he doesn't want to know if you're gay because you're going to upset him." Fast forward to this year in particular, my mother and I have a huge falling out. I have not spoken to her since. But I asked my siblings, was that true what she said? And it turns out it was actually the opposite way. My mother had been calling me all sorts of names behind my back. She'd been calling me faggot, he's queer, he's going to go to hell. Meanwhile, my stepfather had never been more accepting of me.
Well, I don't keep a secret that I'm gay at school. If anybody asks, I would say yes, but I'm not walking around, waving my rainbow flags. I don't hide who I am. I've never been physically harassed in school, but I've had people call me faggot and gay and stuff like that, but that's never something that's like bothered me. I'm not offended by those words. There are just certain people and certain places that you know to avoid. I try to avoid underpopulated bathrooms, places in the hall where I know people stand that I don't want to be around that group of people because it could start something. Well, my drag persona is named Cypress Star. It kind of started off by just me wanting to learn how to do makeup for myself because I was in a lot of theatrical productions. It's an escape from my everyday life. I become a different person, and I don't have to deal with things that are bothering Alan at the time.
I am a queer parent. I have a child that's 11 years old. She is also growing up in a very gender-affirming space. Like when she was little, she had a car bed and she had a princess bed. So she never had to choose some type of genderized behavior. By us being out in the world affirming children that they don't have to be a certain way, because you know, we grow and we evolve all the time, and I just think that that's what's really traumatic, is for people to be boxed in or to feel uncomfortable about expressing themselves.
I was born in Louisiana, but I grew up in a military family, so I sort of grew up all over the country, but I landed in North Carolina about 3 years ago. My family is very religious, and they're very military and very Southern, so I never really had a language to talk about it, or I never knew exactly like what it was. It was kind of like don't ask, don't tell, and if no one's asking and no one's telling, then no one's talking about it. And it wasn't until I went off to college, you know, when I was 18, 19, and started doing more traveling and all that kind of stuff, where I started to realize, oh, that's what this is. Like, that's what this is called. I didn't come out to my family until I was 28. When I first told them, it was like awful. Like, it was awful. My dad, one of his first responses was, you know, your partners are not welcome in our house. Like, not, like, that will never happen.
I knew that I was gay, it was a long time ago, around first grade. I mean, I didn't quite know what it was, but I did know that I liked boys, and I didn't really understand why. For years, I had tried to tell my parents, and one time I had told my mom, and she told me it was just a phase. I think she was scared of how I was actually feeling, and then one night, I just had a breakdown, and I told her, and she knew for a fact that this was real. My grandfather, he didn't quite understand at first, but he wasn't rude about it. It took him a long time to come around, though. I'm very grateful that my parents were so accepting, knowing my background with Christian Baptist, very, very Southern Christian Baptist. So I was scared, mostly from my dad. I didn't know how he was going to react, but it turned out really well.
For me, it's personal. My partner and I have been together for 30 years, and so, you know, when people talk about gay marriage, I just want marriage. I don't. I want to know that he would get my Social Security if something happened. You know, to know that I wouldn't have to worry about people coming in and trying to take what we've built over the last 30 years. And doggone it, I think that my marriage is just as valid and as strong as anybody else's. And I want society to recognize the marriage that I'm in just like they do everybody else's. I want the guy I live with to be protected. And I want our relationship to be honored and recognized by the state I live in and pay taxes to.
Certainly, in many ways, it has gotten better, and it's been progressively so. But ever since George Bush and his born-again approach to the world, you get all these Christians all fired up about, you know, their hate towards sexual minorities, when in fact, I don't think the churches gave a damn before. Now it's become a politicized thing, and people feel they have to make a decision, and they've got to join one side or the other.
When I heard all these people talking about it and saw it suddenly, all these church people were involved in this movement. I thought, what are these church people doing messing in my life? So even though I felt I was comfortable and even though I felt I had an open lifestyle, that transformed me.
The whole marriage thing it's different. I never thought that it was possible for me. You know, like I remember going to other people's weddings, straight friends who were getting married, and I remember being at their weddings and thinking, I could never have this. This is not possible for me. You know, like for my partner's family, there was something about marriage that was crossing a line. Like we went to visit my parents like the weekend after we got married, and my mom was like, well, Brandon will sleep in the guest house and you can sort of sleep in the spare room in our house. And I was kind of like, you know we're married, right? Like, and you also know that we live together. And that was the first time that she was like, yes, we know that you're married. End of conversation. I could have put my foot down. I could have forced the issue, but I decided to be a little more patient with them. I think just being in their house was enough, you know, just to help them know that we're normal people, if that makes any sense, that like our lives are just as boring as theirs, and like our marriage actually looks a lot like their marriage, you know.
After Joy and I got married October 27th, 2013, we went to Charlottesville, Virginia, to the JAG office. That's the Judge Advocate's office, and got Joy a ID card, a spouse ID card for the military, because I'm retired and she's now my dependent. And we were the first couple to go to that particular office. So we had to help the woman a little bit with all the paperwork and everything, but she was very nice to us and we really enjoyed it.
Your oldest daughter was very supportive when you asked me to marry you.
That's true, I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
And she was scared to call her and tell her.
And it was not romantic either.
It was so great.
We were sitting watching TV. Mm-hmm. It was cold. I was on one sofa, she was on the other, and I just kind of muted the television and said.
She got all nervous.
I did. I came over to her side, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do, and basically trying to ramble through it. And then I said, I just need to ask you because I've been thinking about this for so long. Will you marry me? And she said yes, and I was happy. But then we couldn't decide on anything, so we haven't done anything.
We haven't done anything.
Where, when, rings.
Yeah.
It's too complicated.
Which is, that does kind of piss me off that we can't get married here. It really does.
My partner and I met here, and we went to California because in California I could adopt her daughter, her biological daughter, and we could also adopt other children, which here in North Carolina we couldn't be partnered and adopt a child.
Discrimination looks like it has been legalized in the nation, and if not the world, so that's affecting us on a daily basis, like how we're living.
I think it's outrageous that the very first and only amendment to the North Carolina Constitution is an amendment that denies people common human rights. So to put gay and lesbian rights up to a vote is I think shameful and an embarrassment for North Carolina, and I hope it's overturned soon.
It's interesting to be here at this particular time in history, and it's like you have those moments of going, I don't know what we're doing here at this point in history, but it feels important.
The general public is coming around to LGBT people.
If you're struggling like where you are now, I think it's important to find some sort of escape, coping mechanism that's positive.
You ultimately hold the power. People can say anything to you, but it's you have the decision of how you let it affect you.
I think a lot has to do with us, who we are, and you just got to be able to say to people, look, hold it. this is my life.
When possible, be open with people. Our lives are kind of testaments, and I think that that's how things kind of get better.
When you break down those barriers, it's easier to break the next barrier.
Everybody's voice is meaningful and necessary in this movement.
We have to show people that we are powerful, that we are who we are, and that's that. I think to an extent your generation has empowered that thought.
And there's still homophobia, still transphobia, but I've also caught racial discrimination from the LGBTQ community. It does break my heart, just because this is a community that fostered me, it took me in when I didn't have anywhere else to go. But at the same time, I know in the future, and I believe this, and I already claim this, I know that we're not going to go through these issues